It's a real pleasure for me to be with you today. I thought I would start to talk right ahead about the EU rapid deployment capability and the integration of the capacity management. But because of what I heard earlier, I feel that I should start with something more fundamental. And I hope that after this small introduction, nobody is ever going to think again that there is a competition or that there is an inconsistency between the EU and NATO. Okay? This is, sorry to say it very bluntly, this is the most stupid idea that we could imagine. And I'm going to demonstrate you why. Let's go a little bit back into European history. And let's go back to an instrument that was created in 1954 after we dramatically failed to reach the European defense community. And that was due to the fact that the French Parliament declined to ratify. We had an opportunity to have a true common policy, which could have led to a European integrated army. But because of a sovereign reflex of the French, the European defense policy is going to remain intergovernmental and it still is so today. So this is something that we have to take in mind. So what did we do when we failed in 1954 to create that European defense community? Well, we resuscitated the 1948 Treaty of Brussels. There was an additional protocol in Paris, and we founded the Western European Union. Now, the Western European Union, throughout its history, its main achievement has been in the field of capacities. There was the Western European Union Armaments Group that was really devoted to finding ways to cooperate, to create military equipment together, to do research and to have common programs. So let's keep in mind, first of all, that the first elements of European defense integration were capacity integration, research and development of military equipment. Now, at the time, the Western European Union, we had the founding members of the European Community, and we had the United Kingdom. Now, mark my words. Mark my words. Before we created the Common Security and Defense Policy, in the Western European Union, every single member country of the Western European Union was a NATO member at the same time. No exception. So at that time, we were thinking in terms of what do we need for our collective self-defense, and we had NATO. Now, all the members of the Western European Union being NATO members, why would they need to change that and to do it in the Western European Union rather than in NATO? There was absolutely no reason for that. And they did not do it. But they were thinking, what are other things that we need to do from a military point of view, which we do not do in NATO? And I remind you that crisis management in NATO only came with the 2010 NATO strategic concept. Before that, NATO was only looking at common defense. So the Western European Union starts to look, and then we have 1992, the Petersburg tasks, where we see what are we going to do as Europeans that is not in the remit of NATO, but where we are going to need military means. And these are the Petersburg tasks. That's the projection of force outside the Union for stability purposes. And this eventually translates into Article 43 of the treaty, where we describe the tasks that we want to be able to do as the European Union. So from a job sharing point of view, we are not in the same kind of missions with the EU as with NATO. But where is the problem then? And why do people still believe? Well, we have a single set of forces. And that means that as we look at things that we should do at EU level, well, these, while they're being used for the EU, they are not available for NATO. That's the principle of the single set of forces. And that was a concern. At moments when we were decreasing our investments, that we wouldn't have enough means for our collective self-defense because we were doing something in the EU on the side. But again, there's never been a question about doing collective self-defense in the EU. And we will even see that Article 42.7 is different from Article 5 in NATO. So this being said, forget about the idea that there is a competition between NATO and the EU. The next thing, before starting the 2 points that I'm going to tell you, is remember, when NATO asks its allies to put means and capacities at the disposal of the alliance through the NDPP in NATO, where they apportion capacities that countries should have, they just want you to have them. They are not telling you that you should buy them X, Y, Z. They just tell you you have to have them. Okay? So that means that it is then for the allies and the states to make a sovereign decision how they are going to acquire these means to put them at the disposal of NATO. Now, you all heard about the EU battle groups. And I've heard and I've read papers by academics. The one says they have never been used because there was no political will. They have never been used because the Brits didn't want to use them because they wanted to use NATO. They have never been used because those people who have their troops in the EUBG have to pay for the use of the EUBG if it is deployed and there is no political appetite to do so. I'm going to give you another answer. I'm going to give you a military answer. If you want to make sense of military work, and I see that I'm not only the only military in the room today, there's something that is sacred for us. Ends, ways, and means. If you do not have ends, ways, and means, you are doing nothing from a military point of view. Now, ends is what you want to do. We just spoke about it. Petersburg Tasks 1992, Article 43 describes exactly what we want to do. The means, well, we had the European battle groups already for a number of years. But then, when there comes a crisis, do we use these battle groups? No, we don't. And you know why? Because the middle, the ways, is missing. We do not know how we are going to use them. When there is a crisis, we start to think, oh, there's a crisis. Should we do something about it? Let's first discuss politically. Should we do something? Yes, we should do something, but preferably not with lethal means. Yes, preferably, but we should also look at the other side first if nobody else is doing something. And at the end of the day, we end up in a situation where we have a crisis in Mozambique in February and we manage to deploy 100 people somewhere in September. Okay? So the ways is what we were missing. And the ways, what is the ways? It's planning. It's planning. It's advanced planning. To know in advance what your contingency plans are going to be, and if something happens, to have the plan and to be able to deploy. This is what we were missing. In the strategic compass, when we speak about the EU rapid deployment capacity, this is fundamental. How are we going to use it? And this is where we come with what we call advanced planning and operational scenarios. We decide up front, and that work is on the way. We have identified 5 scenarios where we believe that the EU should be able to act militarily. Rescue and evacuation, initial phase of a stabilization, support to humanitarian help and disaster relief, conflict prevention, and peace enforcement. This is what we want to be able to do. And for each of them, we are going to make advanced plans, generic plans, saying if that happens, this is roughly what our plan is going to be, how we're going to deploy. It's not enough, because with that, once you have your plan, you have to decide exactly what are you going to need. In military terms, that's a CGSOR, Combined Joint Statement of Requirements. So we have to know in advance what we're going to need to be able to carry that out. But it's not even enough, because what we need is that we discuss these cases first at the political level in the Political and Security Committee. And we say, guys, do we agree around this table that this is what we want to do? Now, the military prepared some contingency plans for us. Have a look at it, give it to your military, and let's endorse the plans and let's agree that if something happens, this is what we're going to do. Okay? So we don't need to reinvent the thing or to create a mission or to... we already know in advance that we agreed that in that case, we would do that kind of missions, advanced planning. Now, when we look at the means, and if we look at what we want to be able to do, these European battle groups, we need to change them a bit, because they were very unattractive for the member states. You train a battle group, and then it's for 6 months standby. You don't do anything else with it, because people are just waiting for something to happen, which they know in the meantime that will not happen because we've never used them. And then countries say, well, I cannot afford to put my military on standby, knowing that during that time they're not going to be trained, they're not going to do exercises, and so on. So we want to increase the duration of that battle group standby period to 12 months, and we want these battle groups to do life exercises to train for the scenarios that we decided they might be used for. But that's not enough, because we will need what we call strategic enablers. Now again, these are the same strategic enablers that we also need for NATO. So we're not going to block them and to say, well, they are for EU and you cannot use them because we need them in standby. We're going to say, let's make an inventory of these strategic enablers: strategic transport, strategic lifting, Row 2 field hospitals, cyber means, the logistical means. And let's make a matrix of all these tools. They will remain under national command, but we will know when something happens where we have to go and ask for these strategic enablers to be able to deploy our soldiers. Okay. And when we speak about the 5,000, which is a random, rough number, we speak about the battle group, but also all the military that are using these strategic enablers. Okay, that is the 5,000 figures. Now, if we want to do that, there's a number of other things that we need. We will need fast political decision making, the biggest problem. I once had a discussion, it was still with Jean-Claude Juncker at that time, and he was dreaming about a European army, you know, the European army. And I told him, I said, you know, it's funny because you're dreaming about the bigger car, but you still do not have a driving license. And the political decision making is your driving license. It's what authorizes you to use your means. As long as you don't have the driving license, you cannot drive the car. So let's think about the driving license before thinking about buying the bigger car. And the driving license is the political decision making. So let's see how we can make a political decision to use our forces in something that goes at the speed of relevance. Not in 6 months after the beginning of the crisis. No, we are speaking about being able to deploy 2 days after a crisis comes because we have anticipated it. Now, what else do we need then? We need focused intelligence. We need focused intelligence. We need the intelligence community to focus on these scenarios that we identified where we might use our forces. And once they see that something might happen, they must very fast go to the PSC, say, guys, something is happening there. And you need to start the discussion, the political discussion now. The second thing that we need is we need a commander. This EU rapid deployment capacity needs a standing commander who can look. He says, okay, if this is happening, I'm going to use my EU battle group. These are the strategic enablers that I probably will need. Let's start to call my German friend, my Finnish friend, my Estonian friend, my Belgian friend imagine that 3 months down the road we're going somewhere, your field hospital, your planes, your cyber capacity, can we use them? And as the crisis evolves, that commander must be able to tell the units, you were on a 3 weeks notice to move, I now want you to be ready within 1 week. In such a way that as we evolve towards the crisis, and in the meantime the PSC is discussing already, like, we agree that we are going, because this is something where we are all concerned. And this is something that does not fall under the Article 5 of NATO or anything like that. That is really something that we should do at a European level. And then, if we have all that, and if we manage to have all this decision-making up front, then when something happens, one meeting of the PSC. And here, and that's a very personal statement, I believe that the Council should delegate to PSC ambassadors for these specific scenarios the right to make a decision in the same way that the North Atlantic Council could make it in NATO. So that's for the part of the EU rapid deployment capacity. It makes sense if it is done well, and if we manage to have this prior political endorsement of the scenarios and the plans. If we have a standing command structure, a standing C2 structure, and that we have a focused intelligence, then we can make it work. So it makes sense, and I am optimistic that by 2025 we will be able to do it. So far it's in the strategic compass. All the timelines that are in the strategic compass to reach the 2025 deadline up to now are met. Okay. But I spoke now about operational use of forces. But remember what I said in the beginning, that the EU started thinking about defense integration with the Western European Armament Group in the logic of capacities. And that makes sense, because the EU is first and foremost a very strong economic tool. We have a market, we have rules, we can edict rules, we can have norms, and we have all the institutions to make common decision makings. So that would really be a pity not to use all these tools. So what we should do is to think, how can we emulate all the things that we were able to do in the EU in the past, and also apply them to the military. And now I'm going to become a little bit academic. For those who have studied integration theories, you have the federalism, where there is an elite that thinks about an idea and then top-down convinces people to use it. It was difficult when we were 6 in the beginning, imagine with 27. But there is another theory which is called functionalism. And then for those who really want to look at, go and look up the neo-functionalist theories of Moravcsik, which says, let's take something that works well and let's use the recipes for that thing to things we have an overspill of what we have there to other fields. And this is, by the way, what happens with DG GROW and the development of the DG defense industry and space. We were simply saying the Commission has the remit to increase the competitivity of the industry. Why wouldn't the Commission do something to improve the competitivity of the defense industry? And it was the first time ever that the Commission was going to deal with something military. And let's be honest, even if we're talking about 10 billion euros, it's not going to be a dimensionating budget now. But the principle that for the first time the Commission, from an economic point of view, is looking at defense is an important milestone. Because it started to generate all the initiatives that we have seen now. If we can do that, and again, it makes perfect sense, because once we have these capacities, they will be used. Do you know where they will be primarily used, these capacities? Not in the EU. They will primarily be used in NATO, in the high end of the violence spectrum. If we develop a common battle tank in the EU, have you ever seen a European mission deploying battle tanks? No, it shouldn't, because that's capacity. Member states must have the military capacities. Where and how they are going to use them, that is another story, but mainly they must have them. NATO doesn't say you have to source them here or you have to source them there, they just say you have to have them. Then it makes sense for European member states to do it in the most efficient way and to get the most value for your bucks that you're spending. And that you have to do by defragmenting the industry. We have to do things together because the unit price will include the production, but will include also the research and the development and all the development. And it will make the European defense base more competitive. We will be able to buy more for lower costs. It will also make it more attractive for other countries to buy European technology, because we will be in a better place on the market. And on top of that, we are reducing our strategic dependence from other actors. I can give you an example of that. Every time you buy a technology that includes American components, they decide whether you can get the maintenance, whether they're going to supply it when you need the replacement, and they decide if you can re-export it to another country. Now, if you want to make your own decisions, you should get rid of that kind of problems. And the last point that I'm going to make about this, I'm going to prove to you that it is in the interest of the United States itself to let the EU get its own industry. We regularly receive, and we heard it from Mrs. Voutmans, we regularly receive the reproach that we're not doing enough and not spending enough in our defense. Why is that so? Because if you tell a European politician today that he has to spend money in defense, he sees that as a pure out-of-pocket cost that is lost for the budget. Every euro that you spend is a euro that you do not have for another policy. So we have to change that mentality. What if we can convince them that every euro that they spend is going to give jobs to European workers who will pay taxes, is going to profit to European companies that will also pay taxes, is going to develop new capacities that will reduce our dependency in such a way that our industry will not have to buy or not be imposed to buy at a certain price from others. Now, if you can bring this into a viable and sustainable macroeconomic model where you can tell, you know, you're not spending a euro, you're actually spending 20 cents. because the 80 other cents are going to flow back into your economic system through the market economy. If we manage to do that, and if we have a sustainable macroeconomic model, then we will have an incentive to spend more. If we spend more, the burden sharing between Europe and the United States in NATO is going to improve as well. So the small advantage that the US could get from European countries buying US military equipment, it is very small in comparison to the advantage that they would have if the EU collectively starts to spend more efficiently, to bring its contribution to NATO. And I hope that I didn't go too far over my allocated time. And I'm, of course, ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
I have 100 questions for you, but just two perhaps. One is if with these joint units and capabilities, would it not be the most straightforward thing to integrate straight into the chain of command of NATO? Or put it differently, I understood these units were formed with a view towards having independent decision capabilities and independent capabilities for action. I don't know if that's true, I'm not an expert in these things, but isn't there, so to speak, a conflict in terms of decision trees and chains of commands that is almost built into these things? The second question I have has to do with procurement. I noticed from speeches given by the commander of the German forces that when the Germans announced their new procurement intentions, it's not a program, it's an intention, that he said, we need something that actually rolls and flies and shoots and works now. We don't need things that we want to develop and then perhaps in 30 years from now they don't shoot, don't fly, and don't and don't roll. I hope I don't overcite him, but it sounded like he was not happy with how things in European procurement worked. So, what would your response to that be?
Well, to the first one, to integrate everything in the NATO chain of command. There's a few problems. First of all, there's a membership problem. As we all know, we do not have a totally symmetric membership. We have a number of member states that are not NATO allies, and we have allies that are not EU members. That means that because both in NATO and in the EU we are in an intergovernmental model that requires consensus of all the members to act. And because the jobs that we want to do in NATO and in the EU are fundamentally different in nature, your biggest problem is the integrity of your chain of command and the link to your political decision making, which are not the same in the two organizations. Once it comes to the units, I can tell you, for 99%, these are the same integrated units, because all the EU members, even those who are not NATO members, use NATO doctrines, use NATO standards for their equipment, are interoperable with NATO because they deployed together in Afghanistan. So when we say the EU has no integrated army, neither has NATO. NATO does not have an army. NATO is the result of the means that the member states or its allies puts at the disposal in NATO. So for me, we can, there where we would need to have a much better cooperation is in the job sharing, when it comes, for instance, to common defense and resilience of societies. NATO has a very good command structure to command military units for defense. When it comes to resilience of society, the tools that we have in the EU are far better than what NATO will ever have. So, because we have the expertise in the Commission, because we can deal with civilian aspects of crisis that NATO cannot deal with, because they do not have neither the structures, neither the link for the civil-military cooperation. So there, I plead, for instance, for joint exercises where we would simulate a massive hybrid attack on Europe with military and non-military means, where NAC and PSC would come together to say, you deal with the resilient part, the cyber part, and the protection of critical infrastructures. We deal with the military side of defense. So let's build, instead of integrating them, because then you will have people who will say, well, then we can lower the cost. What we need to do is not lower, we need to increase. So we need to find the most efficient way to make the two organizations work together. Procurement and development, interesting question. As a military, if I need an equipment for my forces, I want it now. If it is available in Europe, no question, I should buy it in Europe, because I want to give opportunities to the European companies, to the European industry, in such a way that they can reinvest the price of what I'm buying from them in future research and in consolidation. If it is not available, then I have a number of options. If I need it urgently and that it is vital and that I need it now, I'm going to procure it outside the EU. If it is because I need to complement systems that I already have and that I have a legacy, I'm going to buy it, no doubt, at a place where I can buy it, even if that is outside of the EU. In the longer term, although, if I look at this and I say, hey, this is something that I absolutely need and I couldn't buy it in the EU, well, that's maybe the good moment to think that I should launch the next PESCO projects to develop it and to have it in 8 to 15 years time from now. So there's a difference between procurement and development. Development programs take 6, 8, 10, 12 years. I hope that within, say, 15 years, instead of procuring 40% of our equipment inside of the Union, we will procure 85% of our equipment inside the Union. I hope it somehow answers your questions.
What do you believe that European Commission and Council should define a strategy for a defense industry? Because nationalist minds are still very strong. And if there is no a definite unifying strategy, it will take as long as...
I'm a federalist. Every day I wake up hoping that the dream of the European defense community of 1954 would have come true and that we wouldn't be discussing these issues today. And if tomorrow, and it's an issue, because sometimes I tell my PSC ambassador, you know, my biggest wish is that PSC wouldn't exist and that we wouldn't need it, because we would have brought this kind of decisions at the level of supranational power in something like the Commission. But to answer your question, how to define the strategy? Well, I can reassure you, there's a lot of work and a lot of very good work that is being done between the Council and the Commission. Remember, I was saying things like things need time to trickle down to the things. I can tell you, I was already dealing with these issues when I was still at the NATO side in 2015. And then I came at this side 2018, and we're 2022. When I came here, it was you could not imagine a second that the European Defence Agency would sit around the table with the Commission to discuss about projects and capacities and programs that would then go over into industrial programs on the side. This is happening every day now. So there is, as long as we have programs and that we are developing projects where member states are involved, it is at the side of the European Defence Agency. Once we are going to realize them through industrial consortia, they are going to be supported by the Commission. These two talk to each other. The member states go to the Commission and say, listen, if you are going to give subsidies for the development of a program, do it preferably in that and that and that and that field, because these are the capability gaps that we have today and that we need to be able to address. So this strategy, again, it is not a top-down federalist approach, it is a functionalist bottom-up approach that is little by little going in the right direction. I'm an optimist.